So today we're going to start with an overview of land-based gaming. So as many of you know, a hotel, casino, resort, also known in some parts of the world as an integrated resort or an IR, it's a huge enterprise employing thousands of people in numerous departments. Each of those departments uses computer systems to keep the operations going. Some of the systems used are shared across departments, and others are very specific to the tasks that are being performed within that group. Now, as I talk through this, you'll find that I'll probably use the words department and group. When I use group, I mean the main discipline. And when I use department, I mean, like a smaller team unit within that larger group. So I'm going to go through each group or department in an IR. I'm not going to go through all of them. I'm just going to go through some of the larger ones. And then I'm going to highlight the use of technology that I believe is really conducive to the conversation that we need to have, and also point out some of the issues that arise. I'm also only going to focus on two aspects of an IR, the hotel and casino. Now, obviously, there's a whole resort side with lots of departments responsible for a whole variety of tasks to provide IR guests with an awesome experience. However, I thought focusing on technology used by the hotel and the casino groups was probably more suited to our conversation. So I'll go through the groups and pick some departments with them to talk about, and then I'll focus on the systems that they use and how those systems have to act like musicians within an orchestra. They've got to work together harmoniously to create beautiful music. Otherwise, you end up with something that's, well, much less than pleasing. Next. So let's start with the hotel operations group. Now, this group is comprised of many departments. For example, you have reservations, housekeeping, front desk, and banquets. Now, I chose those four departments because key technology is used by each one, and this starts to sort of paint the picture of how legacy proprietary systems have impacted the gaming industry's ability to adopt and implement new and emerging technologies. So as a guest going to an IR, you most probably will interact first with reservations. Of course, today, reservations or bookings for an IR stay can be done either using the IR's website or by using third parties such as Expedia or Booking.com. However, should you need any special arrangements or should you need to make any changes, the department you'll deal with is most likely reservations. The reservations department obviously uses critical systems, and one of them is called the Lodging Management System, or LMS. Now, the LMS is essentially the heart of hotel operations. Why? Because at its core, it stores the room inventory of the hotel within the IR. Each room that is booked is recorded within the LMS. Room blocks, usually discounted and sold to third parties, are also handled by the LMS. The LMS has APIs that integrated to the IR's website as well as to those by the third parties. It also has APIs that integrated into the point of sale or POS system that is used within the IR. The LMS also has to have, other critical APIs, for example, to integrate into the IR's Casino Management System, or CMS. Unfortunately, I'll probably end up using a lot of acronyms, but I'll try to provide a bit of a cheat sheet of them so that you can make sense of what I lovingly call the gaming alphabet soup. So let's go back to the customer's experience with hotel operations. So when you book a room, your information is logged within the LMS, and that room is obviously marked as occupied from the time the IR allows you to check in to when you check out. Knowing which rooms are occupied and, more importantly, which rooms will be vacated and then reoccupied is, obviously very important to the housekeeping department. because housekeeping, while comprised of several other departments responsible for specific tasks, is generally responsible for making sure, well, that the rooms are cleaned and ready for the next guest. Therefore, housekeeping's management relies heavily on the accuracy of the LMS booking data to ensure that the right amount of staff is on duty each day and to make sure that each room is ready when the guest shows up. Nothing I hate more than after a long day of travel, you get to a hotel only to be told that your room's not cleaned yet. What? I mean, you knew I was coming, you knew I was checking in at your prescribed time, and yet you don't have my room ready? Seriously, there's no way to start a guest experience more negatively. But let's move on beyond my personal issues with housekeeping and scheduling and actually talk about scheduling. So, one of the key systems usually looked after by the information technology group is the scheduling system. One that I have used and supported in the past is called Kronos, after the Greek god whose sons included, a whole bunch of guys like Zeus, Poseidon, Hades, and others. Why they used a Greek mythological god, I don't know, but Kronos, for some reason, is associated with time. Be that as it may, this system allows each department to set up its shift-based employees within it. It controls all of the punch-in clocks around the IR where hourly employees clock in and clock out, and which interfaces into a variety of other systems, including the LMS and the CMS, to show which employees are on duty. As you can imagine, this is a pretty mission-critical system. Dealers, slot attendants, cooks, servers, front desk clerks, the list goes on, all use the scheduling system to clock in and clock out. Without such a system, there would be no way to orchestrate several thousand employees. So while reservations might be the first department that you, as an incoming guest, may interact with, your hotel stay is actually planned for by housekeeping before you ever show up to the IR. I mean, speaking of showing up, the next department you would probably interact with is the front desk. The front desk staff obviously are responsible for checking in and checking out guests efficiently, pleasantly, and to make a great first impression on check-in and a great lasting impression on checkout. Although, depending on how you got to the IR, the first impression might actually have been valet parking, the bellhop staff, or some other department that I won't be discussing today. However, you'll definitely end up interacting with the front desk. Here I can bring up another one of those things that really irritates me, and I would venture to say that it irritates other guests as well. No, I'm not just complaining because I have you as an audience. There really is a technology issue here, and here's what it is. But before I highlight it, let me give you a little bit of a background. I used to go to Reno, Nevada in the United States once a month for a week, and I would stay in the same IR. And for 3 years, I stayed at the same IR in that same hotel. So that's 36 days, right? And the longest time between each stay was 3 weeks. I was also part of their casino loyalty card program and received marketing offers to shows, restaurants, etc. So what's my complaint? It's this. Every time I got to the front desk to check in, the front desk clerk would ask me for my driver's license and sit there typing in my name and address. Why? I was just here 3 weeks ago. I'm already in your database. Okay, in some database. Why can't you just look me up? And the reason for it could very well be that the LMS that they were using was old, the APIs proprietary and limited in functionality, and there really was no way for them to update their guest experience without potentially spending lots of money and creating huge operational disruptions. So, as you'll get to realize from these conversations we're going to have, I'm not a really big fan of proprietary. I am a huge fan of open source, standards-based applications that are flexible and interoperable. So after 10 minutes of trying to accurately type in my name and address, usually not very accurately, I would finally get a key to my room. Now, again, keep in mind, I'm part of their loyalty program. So the issue here is that there are multiple databases, assuming they are separate databases, just could not talk to each other. And again, that could very well be due to the age and proprietary nature of these APIs. Now, going back to the front desk, as you know, they're there for more than just checking in and checking out of guests. They're essentially the hub connected to many other departments like housekeeping that we spoke about, and also other departments such as concierge and food and beverage. They provide a single point of contact for guest needs. So having systems that can integrate, share data, and provide seamless access to guest information is really critical to providing an optimal guest experience. Unfortunately, that's more the exception than the rule. The last department that I'm going to highlight is in the hotel operations group is banquets. Now you might be asking why banquets? Well, because it really bridges the hotel operations group and the food and beverage group and relies on both the systems used by those groups as well as some pretty specialized software specific to them. Banquets, of course, as the name implies, is the department responsible for everything to do with events in the IR's conference center. Some IRs call banquets by other names, but I've been in this industry for over 30 years. It was banquets back then, so it's still banquets in my mind. You can imagine that the banquets team needs to rely on the hotel operations team and systems for banquet room reservations and small things like, hey, when the guests actually arrive. They also must rely heavily on the food and beverage team because if there's food and beverage being served as part of the banquet, then it's going to be the main kitchen cooking and the F&B bartenders pouring the drinks. So tracking all of this occurs in two different systems and must be reconciled to achieve a single view of the costs incurred to ensure they align with expectations. But before the guests arrive, before the food and the cocktails are served, there's the small detail of planning the banquet space to comfortably provide for the guests. Now, don't think about a conference that you might have gone to with rows and rows of chairs and long tables with a coffee station on one end of the room. Think instead of a wedding reception or a sort of Hollywood red carpet event where table placement is very important. To achieve the right fit for the number of people within the space, the banquet team relies on specialized space management software. Table sizes, chair sizes, number of guests, preferred layout, the size of the banquet room, and other factors such as, is there going to be a stage for a band or a DJ or a dance floor, are all entered into the system, which then provides for an optimal layout. And this layout, by the way, is not just for looks. In many jurisdictions, it has to meet fire code requirements for minimum space between tables and clear access to exits, just in case there's an emergency. Hotel operations, as we just, and again, I just picked four departments within hotel operations. I just went through a number of technologies that they use. And I might be biased in saying this, but as I transition to casino operations, I think by far the amount of technology used by casino ops is more than is used by the hotel. Um, and and again, I'm going to pick four departments within casino operations to highlight the use of technology, the use of APIs, the use of interfaces, and some of the challenges that we face with those legacy APIs. So the first department I'm going to talk about, and I think it's probably one of the most underrated casino operations departments, is cage operations. Now, what is cage operations? Well, this team is the heart of the casino floor. It really enables slots and tables, and it is the gatekeeper to the monies that are going in and out of the casino floor. Um, Many think that the cage is simply where you go to, for example, redeem chips. If you forgot to cash out at the table game, well, then you just go to the cage and you plunk down the chips and they give you money. Or maybe you go to the cage to redeem vouchers that a player might have received for some promotion. However, the cage is much more than that. Just like many other casino operations teams, the cage relies heavily on the casino management system, right? So the CMS used to be, a somewhat simple system that performed a few specialized functions. And those were mostly actually related just to cage cashiering and to table game funding and to player credit. Just two or three major functionalities in what used to be the CMS. Today, however, the CMS has become this monolithic monster that does so many things that it's become the most critical system a casino operations team has within an IR. Um, but back in the day when CMS was a very focused systems, it did a few things exceptionally well. And the first, of course, was cage cashiering, which is related to a variety of tasks, again, such as redeeming chips or vouchers. But more importantly, it was about cashing bank checks, taking front money deposits, doing table openers and closes, and all of those things related to monies. Now, um, many of you know what chips are, what vouchers are, what bank checks are, but maybe some of you might not be very familiar with what front money deposits are. So let me talk a little bit about what that is because it's a pretty interesting and important concept. So, front money is the term used when a player wants to deposit money into an account and then draw against that value when playing tables or slots. Now, for those of you that perhaps monitor what's going on in the world of gaming, maybe outside of Macau and maybe even in the United States or North America, a bit more broadly, you might have noticed that the American Gaming Association has been talking recently about cashless wagering and zero touch sort of hand wagering where people are not dealing with money, and they're using the COVID pandemic as a reason why we ought to move away from using money and start using electronic transfers of funds. What's interesting about this recent push is that the ability to wager cashlessly has existed in the casino industry for decades. What has not existed is buy in from the gaming public to actually use the functionality. Some small subset of the gambling public actually did use it, but they were typically higher worth players and they skewed mostly towards table games. So think about this. Let's say you have, and I'm going to use US dollars, but let's say you've got $5,000 that you brought with you to the casino. Rather than having $5,000 maybe in $100 bills in your pocket, it's a lot safer to go to the cage to deposit the money into an account. The cage cashier will actually take your money, they'll put it into a secure envelope, write your name on it, they'll put it into a safe, and then they'll create an account with your name and the value that you just deposited. They'll give you a piece of paper, and then you can go to a table game, for example, and when you tell the dealer that you want to buy in, the dealer will call the pit clerk over, and the pit clerk is somebody who was assigned um, to each pit. And in some IRs, they actually report to the cage. In some IRs, they report to table operations. But the pit clerk essentially takes your instrument, which is called a marker, and they go to the CMS. They look you up. They see that you've got $5,000. Let's say you want $1,000 worth of chips. They deduct 1,000 from your account, and then the dealer gives you $1,000 in chips, and they give you the piece of paper back. If you lose that piece of paper, it's okay because the pit clerk is going to ask you for ID to verify that it's really you. So it's a lot safer than carrying $5,000 in your pocket. The idea, however, is that now you're wagering cashlessly because you deposited the cash in the cage, and now you're just using a transfer of money from your account into chips and then from chips back into your account. Um, so that used to be mostly available in table games. It is now becoming also available on slots. And the reason that is is because slots have the capability to do electronic funds transfer again from the CMS. So if you're a big slot player, you can do the same thing. Go to the cage, deposit money. They'll enter the value into your account. You've got a player tracking card, a player loyalty card. You go to the slot machine, you put that player loyalty card into the card reader. You'll be asked to enter a PIN number. You put in your PIN number, and then it'll show you the value of your account, and it'll ask you if you want to download all of it or a portion of it to the slot machine. You can choose what to download, and then the value comes down as credits on the slot machine, and you can start to wager without ever touching money again. If you cash out, the money will go back into your account, and you go to a different machine, and you essentially repeat the process. So um, this concept of front money and this concept of electronic funds transfer and cashless wagering is actually important also because it really gives the casino and it really gives regulators very data rich information about which players are wagering what amounts of money, because now you have to be known as a player. You can't be anonymous anymore. You can't be somebody that just walks in and puts, money into the bill validator of a slot machine or throws money on a table, gets some chips and plays, and nobody knows who you are. Now, because you've deposited the money, you've got that marker, you've got your player loyalty card, you've had to enter your PIN number, we know exactly who you are. And all of that information is stored within the CMS, and then information has to be shared then with other systems. Again, the use of APIs becomes very important. Obviously, if you're a player and you're done with your trip in the IR, and you've got money still on your account, you can go to the cage and you can say, I want to cash in. And interestingly enough, what the cage cashiers will do is they'll actually go into the safe. They will retrieve that envelope with the money you gave them, and they will pay you back with the same money that you deposited. And you might be asking yourself, why do they do that? And that is to prevent money laundering. We give you back the same bills that you give us. We do not let you, give us one set of bills and then we'll just go to the cash register, open it up, and give you different bills. We actually return the same bills back to you. Obviously, if you won more than you deposited, then you'll get new bills. But if you have less as a balance than what you originally deposited, you will get the same bills back. Um, I also mentioned that one of the cage's tasks in a function of the CMS is this concept of table game funding. I said table openers and closers. Now, what is that? Well, as you probably all know, each table game has a certain amount of chips in a tray that is assigned to that table and to the dealers that are going to be working the table. The chips in all of those trays, of course, are part of what is called the chip inventory. Now, chip inventory is very interesting and very important. As some of you might know, and maybe you've done it yourself. Let's say you're traveling and you're abroad and you go to a casino and they've got a pretty chip, and it's worth whatever it is, and you decide to keep it as a souvenir. Well, believe it or not, that chip that you took home with you as a souvenir is a liability to the casino, because the casino has to be able to give you real fiat currency if you ever decide to go back and say, here's my chip, please give me money. Now, what casinos do periodically, and when I say periodically, it's every X number of years, 5, 10 years, they will change the chips. And in many jurisdictions, before they can do that, they actually have to notify the general public, in some cases by putting advertisements in newspapers, by putting information in classified ads that specifically tell people you have 60 days, 90 days to bring any of the old chips that you might have, because after 90 days, we will now no longer honor those chips. And they do that specifically for two reasons. One, to sort of keep the chips fresh, keep their look and and feel nice and clean. Um, there's some security reasons as to why they do it, but they also do it because this allows them to flush that chip liability that they had accumulated over the period of time. Now, so the chip inventory is something that the cage looks after. So they know exactly how many chips were issued to every single table. That is the table opener. If tables during the normal course of a day start running low on chips, well, then there is an additional chip impressment that can be ordered, and the chips are delivered to the table. And again, the cage tracks that. And at the end of the day, when the table is closed, the chips and the money that was taken in are counted, and they should balance to the original value of chips that was put in that tray. That's the whole concept behind something called an impressment. Um, to give you an example, if there were $5,000 worth of chips at the beginning of the day, at the end of the day there has to be $5,000 worth of a combination of chips and money that was taken in by the table. Now, that's really easy if there was only one dealer that spent their whole day on the table. But as you know, dealers work in shifts, and that there are dealers that come in and provide a break for the they actually rotate from table to table. So there are multiple dealers that are actually using the same impressed tray. So tracking this becomes a bit more complicated. However, all of this accountability and all of this tracking is done within the CMS. And once again, it's the cage's responsibility. So here, the APIs again play a very vital role because these interfaces go down into something that is usually called the general cashiers. And the general cashiers is where all the money ultimately ends up in a casino. So all of the money coming from slot machines that goes through the count room ultimately goes into general cashiers, and general cashiers actually are the ones that now start to um, give it out to the other departments that actually need to have access to cash. It's a very orchestrated movement of monies that is dragged through the CMS. So you start to get a sense why the CMS is so important, right? Because it is tracking all of this money, and as you well know, we're talking about hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of dollars worth of money. The other thing that the Decage does through the CMS is if the IR issues credit to players, if they are allowed to do that, then the CMS and the cage interface into something that is generally referred to as central credit. And central credit is essentially a small department within the cage that verifies, that bank checks are okay, and that other credit related transactions that are performed are okay. So, for example, if the if the IR allows is allowed to issue credit, then you would meet with somebody in central credit. They would collect some information from you. They would ask you information about your job. They would ask you information about your credit history, bank accounts. They would actually look all this information up very much as if you were, getting a loan to buy a car or getting a loan to buy a house. They would do all the verification, and based on the information you gave them and based on the verification they perform, then they would know exactly how much money they would be, allowed to loan you to gamble. And that money which they loan you is issued to you as a marker, and that same marker process is used. Now, as I start to talk about these various systems and the APIs, I think it's a good point to stop for a moment and talk about one of the standards that GSA created specifically to resolve system to system communication issues. And interestingly enough, the name of the standard is the System to System Standard, or S2S. And let me give you a little example, or a little some reasons behind why S2S was developed. So, um, specifically in the United States and specifically in tribal casinos, um, when tribal casinos first started to open up, they were only allowed to operate something called a class 2 slot machine. Now, there are, generally speaking, two classes of slot machines. There's class 2, which uses a bingo math model, and then there's class 3, also sometimes referred to as Las Vegas style slot machines, that use a true random number generator. But in tribal land, really they were only allowed to use class 2 machines. Now, what's interesting with class 2 is because they use a bingo math model, the slot machines themselves, or the gaming devices, are actually dumb terminals. The determination of the outcome is done using a computer system, much like the determination of the outcome of a bingo game is done by the balls going around in the drum and then the person reaching out and calling out the number. So imagine having a casino with two or three suppliers' class 2 games, which came with their own system. Now think about this and add on ticket in, ticket out functionality, which at the time was very popular, still is. So now what was happening on these tribal casino floors is that a player playing game one would cash out and get a ticket. They would walk around the floor, see another game that they liked. They would walk up, try to put the ticket into that game, but the game would not take it. Why? Well, because that game was not connected to the same system as the first game that the ticket was issued on. So the player would have to walk up to the cage, give the cage cashier the ticket, get money from the cage cashier, walk back to the game that they wanted to play, and put the money in it. It was not a very elegant or customer friendly experience. So we as GSA started to think about how could we get these systems to talk to each other, and that's where the system to system protocol came to be. It was designed to solve a very specific problem. Now, um, that problem still exists in casinos and integrated resorts today. It doesn't exist in terms of the class 2 games on the slot machine, but it very much exists in the proprietary APIs that are still used to interface these very important systems together. And I'll say this: I'm not proud of the industry for doing it, but I'll say it because it's true. A number of suppliers use these APIs as a way to create barriers to entry from other suppliers. So if you're MGM and you're using systems from a particular supplier, that supplier's APIs are what controls how you do things. And it is very difficult, even for a big corporation like MGM or Sands, to actually change those systems out and to break that reliance on just one supplier. There are some um, IR companies that have decided not to be trapped in that sort of experience. Melco is one such company that actually has developed its own casino management system using open source technology, using microservices, and using open source software specifically so that they would not be stuck using the APIs or the systems of just one supplier. So you'd have to really think about doing this from the beginning. It's very difficult, as I mentioned, once you're up and running and these systems have become, so integral to your operation. It's very difficult to replace them then. So again, important to understand the issues that we face, and this starts to also explain why, as we come up with new standards, as we come up with new technologies, why it takes so long for those standards and those technologies to actually get adopted in our industry. Um, so as you can see from this example, right, the use of standard and modern APIs can in fact have a very significant impact on the customer's experience and of course on the profitability of the IR. Now, the last so let me talk a little bit about table game operations, because I think it's also interesting the technology that table games are now using. So it used to be. Actually, so hold on. Before I talk about table games, I apologize. Um, let me um, Let me move on to slot operations. I skipped slots. How could I skip slots? They're the department that I spent most of my time in when I worked in at properties. So let me go to slots. Um, and let me start here at the very heart of it, which is the slot machine. So obviously, every slot machine on the casino floor, on the integrated resort floor, is connected to a system that is typically mandated by regulatory authorities. Now, um, it used to be that the system was called the slot management system or slot accounting system. Today, because the casino management system has become so big and so monolithic, typically it is the casino management system that slot machines are actually interfacing with. And that CMS is the same CMS, of course, that is used for player tracking, for cage operations, and for all of the other things that we've already discussed. So it's that one big system. Again, you get to see how important and mission critical these systems get to be. Um, so so now you've got essentially two main communication protocols that are used by slot machines to send data to the slot accounting system or the CMS. The first is the SAS protocol, and SAS actually stands for Slot Accounting System Protocol, which was developed in the early 80s. It is a serial polled protocol, and what I mean by polled is that the host system has to ask the slot machine, "Do you have any information for me?" And then the slot machine says, "Yes, I do," and sends the information. And then the host system goes to the next slot machine and says, "Hello, do you have any information for me?" And it goes, down the line, slot machine by slot machine. Um, and the second protocol is the GSA Game to System or G2S protocol. And G2S, of course, was developed in the late 90s. It is an Ethernet high speed network based interface. And it works on a publish and subscribe model. So the host system actually subscribes to data that can be published by the slot machine. And whenever the slot machine has data that it needs to publish, it just puts it out there, and then the subscriber gets the data and consumes it. So you can see that SAS, being a serial based polled protocol, is very slow, whereas G2S, being Ethernet based, high speed network based, and being published and subscribed, is very fast. There are some other limitations. For example, um, with SAS, you can only connect a maximum of two systems to a slot machine. One system has control, the other system can collect meters and events, and that's about it. G2S, on the other hand, can support multiple hosts, each being able to control the slot machine or control a portion of slot machine specific functionality. And this is very important because, again, we start to talk about APIs, we start to talk about proprietary versus open, and we start to talk about data transparency, data access, and control that the operator has over their operations. With SaaS, it's very limited. With G2S, it is much, much broader. But I'll talk more about SaaS and G2S and the protocols later on in the presentation. So I'm just gonna stop there for now. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about some other technology that is used by slot operations, which is local and wide area progressive jackpot systems. Now, you've probably seen these if you've gone to an IR. They're typically visible in displays above the slot machines that have numbers that are constantly incrementing. Those jackpots are shared amongst one or more slot machines in a bank next to each other within the same IR if it's a local progressive, or it might be a wide area progressive where slot machines in one IR are connected to slot machines in a different IR over a geographically dispersed area. So you could have, for example, up and down the Kotai Strip, you could have each different integrated resort could have a number of slot machines that are connected to slot machines at the next integrated resort, and so on and so forth. Obviously, the more slot machines you've got connected, the faster and the higher the jackpot value is going to go, and the more excitement it's going to generate because people, will want to play those games because of the value of the jackpot they could potentially win. Now, there are two types of progressive jackpots. And this is important because of the technology that they use. So, one progressive jackpot type is called symbol based, and the other is called mystery based. So, what does that mean? Well, typically, symbol based jackpots um, are ones that are awarded when the right symbols line up on the slot machine that a player is playing. And typically, those symbols are the highest paying combination that that particular slot machine has. So let's say, for example, the highest combination is three sevens, very simplistic example. And let's say the slot machine is connected to a local area progressive. When a player achieves those three sevens on the main line, the slot machine will lock up and it will say, I've won the progressive jackpot. Because the jackpot is not being paid by the slot machine, but is being tracked and paid by the jackpot controller, which is a separate piece of technology, the slot machines have to go talk to the jackpot controller to find out what is the amount of money that I should pay for this jackpot. So again, here's an API where the slot machines are talking to an external device called the jackpot controller to not only get the value of the jackpot when it is won, but to also communicate all of the monies being wagered, because that is used by the jackpot controller to increment the value of the jackpot and to drive the value that players see on the displays. Um, a mystery jackpot, on the other hand, is sort of like its name implies. It is based on something called an nth coin methodology. So the nth coin could be, for example, on the 1 millionth coin in, hit the jackpot, or it could be on the 1,000th coin in, hit the jackpot. So it's got nothing to do with symbols. It is simply based on a number of amount of money that has been wagered on the connected slot machines. Almost like, you walk into a store and the store owner says, "Congratulations, you're my 1 millionth customer, and here's a coupon for some money off." Um, In this case, because it is a mystery progressive that is not tied to any symbols, the player could actually have a losing combination on their slot machine, but still win the mystery progressive. And again, that mystery progressive is being calculated and is being controlled by a separate piece of technology called the Jackpot Controller. Um, these APIs are very important because these jackpot amounts get to be quite significant. In North America, some of these jackpots are in excess of $1 million. So you can imagine that the accuracy of these APIs has to be really, 100%. And unfortunately, many of these jackpot controllers use proprietary APIs. G2S handles jackpot controllers using a standardized communication language. So, yes,
About the mystery jackpot. So, can you hear me? Can you hear me?
I can hear you, but if you could speak up just a little bit more, it'd be great.
Maybe I come up near the microphone now. Is it better? Okay.
Yes, yes, thank you.
A question about the mystery jackpot. So the jackpot is triggered by the server, right? Then let's say if my casino wants to create a jackpot, like mystery jackpot, I design some graphics or some animation to show when the user hit the jackpot. Can Is it possible to configure the system so that the slot machine will show that animation?
Yes, it is possible. And as a matter of fact, that can actually be done through G2S. The animation itself is external to the slot machine. It could be displayed in what we call the player user interface, and it is again not programmed within the slot machine per se, but it is an external, animation and celebration that is tied to when a jackpot hits. I will give me 1 second. If you go to YouTube, when you have a moment, and look up something called La Volcan, LE space VOLCAN. You and I'll send you the link, Philip, so you can share it. But that what you'll see there is exactly what just was described, an external celebration to a mystery jackpot that when I was at WMS, I helped develop for a couple of casinos up in Canada. Again, it is called La Volcan, VOLCAN, which is the volcano in French. If you can't find it, I'll find the link and I'll send it to you in an email, and you can take a look at it. So the short answer is yes, absolutely, it can be done, and that's the kind of functionality that a newer extensible protocol like G2S supports, whereas an older sort of end of life protocol like Sas just can't do it. The technology when it was developed just did not contemplate these kind of things. Um, I talked a lot about APIs and proprietary APIs, and when I was talking about wide area progressive controllers and local area progressive controllers, these jackpot controllers, I just want to share with you there are two main. Actually, there is actually one main mystery jackpot protocol that is prevalent in the industry, and it's from a company that actually doesn't exist anymore. I don't think it's called the Micron Mystery Progressive Controller. Um, and the Micron Mystery Progressive is one that came out and was extraordinarily popular, and worked quite well, and it sort of became like the de facto standard. Now, as I mentioned, G2S does this functionality, and it does it obviously in a standardized open protocol. So we would like to see people start to move towards using G2S for this functionality as opposed to these proprietary protocols. Let's move on to table games now, and and it's interesting because I mentioned I spent most of my career working in slots. I've never worked in table games, and maybe I'm biased when I say this, but table games used to be pretty low tech operations. I mean, you had a bunch of tables, some cards, maybe some dice, a roulette wheel and a ball, a couple of chips, and you were good to go. And there really wasn't much in the way of technology. Well, things have changed, right? Gone are the days of just simple games. Now we've got a whole bunch of technology being used, like RFID, card shufflers, high definition, low profile cameras that are being used to track chips and the cards being dealt. And all of a sudden, now we have table tracking software that is very similar to the casino management system or slot accounting system that slot machines were connected to. And what these table tracking systems are now doing is they're integrating, again, unfortunately, through these proprietary APIs to a variety of technologies that are counting, that are reading the chips that are being wagered and the cards that are being dealt. And they do this for two reasons. One, to make sure that the accuracy of the games is what it should be, to reduce the number of mistakes that dealers might make because, well, dealers are human, and B, to offer much more accurate player tracking on table games. And why is that important? Well, because in the past, the way reinvestment in players was done on tables was via the pit supervisor or the pit boss. Typically, they would walk around behind the tables and they would have a little notebook and they would jot down, a little description about the player, and they would look at how many chips they've got in front of them, and they would sit there and they would watch a couple of games, and they would watch, how much they're wagering, and then they would walk onto the next table and they would rotate around, and if they come back to the first table and the player is still there and they're still wagering the same amount, they would look at their watch and they would say, okay, he's been here for 15 minutes and he's been wagering at or about the same level. So here's what the reinvestment amount in this player is going to be. Not very accurate. Not only not very accurate from the player's perspective, but also not very accurate from the casinos or the IR's perspective. So having truly accurate tracking mechanisms, be it RFID embedded in chips, or again, these high definition cameras that are reading barcodes on the side of chips, or looking at and reading and recognizing the colors of the chips, and being able to really track how much a player is wagering, makes it better for both the IR and the player. So this technology now has become quite pervasive. The other interesting technology is card shuffling, and you might say, okay, how high tech is a card shuffler? I will encourage you to take a look, go on the internet and take a look at these card shufflers and the technology they use. They have randomizing features within them that are as complicated as the random number generators in slot machines. There are card shufflers now that are constantly shuffling cards. So one deck is all you really need, because it's constantly being shuffled. No longer do you need to have six decks in a card shoe in order to lower the odds from a player perspective. Now you can just use one deck, and these card shufflers have essentially eliminated the possibility that anyone can be doing any card counting. I mean, they've put card counters out of business. Now, so sophisticated are these card shufflers that they've become quite expensive, and as a result of that, they've introduced another bit of technology within them, and that is that they can actually track the number of games that they deal, and they can send that information to a system, and then the IR, rather than buying these card shufflers, can actually lease them and pay a per game dealt fee to the card shuffling device owner. So it's interesting how these technologies, continue to evolve. And the combination of card shufflers and table tracking and the elimination of card counting has now spawned a new thing, which is progressives on table games. And you might say, how does a progressive on a table game work? Well, it works very similarly to a progressive on a slot machine, in that, every time there is a game played, if nobody hits a particular hand, well, then a portion of the monies wagered go towards the progressive jackpot, and that jackpot increases until the table tracking system recognizes that the right hand was issued, and then that player actually wins the jackpot. It's quite interesting if you walk around an IR to see how table games have changed in the way they use technology today versus back in the day when you walked around and you saw roulettes, Big Six, Sigbo, Red Dog, and a bunch of other games that used very very little technology, if anything at all. um so finally, before I move off of casino operations, let's talk a little bit about security and surveillance. What some people refer to as the eye in the sky, or Big Brother. The lovely men and women who work in the surveillance department, looking at what's going on in the casino floor, trying to make sure that there are no illegal activities occurring. Now, it used to be that surveillance systems were not much more than simple CCTV systems, um, where the cameras were, hardwired to a video controller, and then they were actually wired to an array of VCRs. Yeah, VCRs, um, which recorded the activity on the casino floor and in sensitive areas like the cage and the count rooms and general cashiers, places where there was a lot of money. Um, as camera technology has evolved, surveillance systems actually took advantage of the ability to, pan, tilt, and zoom. And all of a sudden, they went from just black and white to color and to high def. And now they could really get in close up images of a particular event. Now, these cameras at the time still were operated by hand using a console type joystick. Imagine somebody sitting there with a joystick and they're looking at something, doesn't look quite right, and so they use the joystick to pan a camera, to turn it around, and then to zoom in and actually record what it is that they're looking at. um, as technology continued to evolve, these cameras started to allow interfacing into those casino management or slot management systems. Now, what was really cool about this is that the surveillance system, the camera system, could take in a simple numbering system for each slot machine, for example, and for each table game. Um, and then based on connectivity between the CMS and the surveillance system, the cameras would pan, tilt, zoom, and record on their own. So how did that work? So let's say, for example, we're talking about slot machines, and there was a bank numbering scheme where the number was the location name, the bank name, and then the bank number. So something like A for location A or zone A, B as bank number B, and then the slot machine number, like 01. So AB01 translated into zone A, location B, and slot machine 01. If a message from the casino management system went to the surveillance system and said an illegal door open has been registered on AB01, then the surveillance system could look up where AB01 was on the physical floor and locate the closest camera or cameras and automatically start to record. No longer did you need, surveillance agents or officers sitting there with joysticks trying to react to what was going on. Again, these APIs were unfortunately and still are proprietary. Um, but this is pretty interesting. Now, all of this started to occur when the slot machines almost exclusively used the SAS protocol. Now, imagine if those slot machines were using G2S, the number of events and the number of the amount of data that could be used by these systems to automatically record things would be much more significant, simply because G2S makes much more data available from those slot machines than does SAS. Now, we're just a few slides into my presentation, and I've probably used more than a dozen acronyms so far, and I think you've done really well to kind of keep up. And I talked about a bunch of departments within a single group called hotel operations, and I've talked about some of the systems that they use and how they must integrate. And then I talked a little bit about casino operations and, of course, the various groups and departments and the critical systems that they use. The key takeaway here is sort of what I've been saying over and over again, and that these systems cannot be thought to be, standalone programs that can work in isolation. They must integrate with each other. And the degree to which they are capable of that integration, the ease with which they can achieve the required degree of integration and the reliability of that interoperability will have a real significant impact, not only on guest experiences, but ultimately on IR profitability. Um, so, having talked about two two of these major groups within an IR, I think it's very clear to see that brick and mortar IRs require a significant capital investment to build the physical structure. And all you have to do is go out to the strip and take a look at these huge monstrosities. I mean, the amount of money that is spent to build these integrated resorts is amazing. Then think about the size of the workforce that is needed to staff all of the essential functions, and then the use of the variety of technology and systems that are necessary to deliver those desired services, right? And then on top of all of that, think about all of the regulatory approvals that are needed of those very critical key systems to make sure that they are working the way they're supposed to be working when dealing with games and money. It's very very awe inspiring. I think is the right phrase to use. So it's really no wonder um, that the COVID pandemic, which has seen IR gross gaming revenues just plummet, has resulted in massive furloughs and layoffs. I mean, there are jurisdictions today that still have casinos shut down. There are jurisdictions that have allowed casinos to open only to have them shut down again, and there are many jurisdictions that have casinos open, but they're operating at a very limited capacity. So it's very important to understand how all of these things have to work together in order to make an integrated resort work. As I mentioned, COVID has had a significant impact in the gaming industry and disproportionately so in land based. And in jurisdictions where online gaming is an option, experts actually are wondering whether players that have gone to online because the casinos have been shut down, they're wondering whether they will ever come back to land based. I personally think that they will. And I think that they will because humans are social animals, and the glitz of the casino floor, the sights and the sounds will entice players to visit. Obviously, destination markets like Macau, like Las Vegas, those will be ones where people will go back to them maybe more quickly than some other places. Um, but however, for many players, their spend in an IR may now actually have to compete with their spend on online casinos. So I do believe that the recovery for some IRs will be much slower and will take much longer. And I think it's also important as we've gone through all of these various departments and all of these various technologies to once again think about that to deliver the services that guests desire, the investment in technology that these IRs make is huge, and the amount of integration with just a few key systems is such that those systems become super critical, which I guess in turn means that their suppliers become super critical and therefore hold the power over the operators. So the use of proprietary protocols and interfaces further solidifies this power, which not only stifles the IR's ability to innovate, but it also stifles the adoption of new technologies within the industry. So, suppliers that have those proprietary protocols are more than happy to compete on that level because it's the plumbing and it's done, it's there, and they can use it to their advantage to hold off the competition. And finally, in addition to the regulatory and other authority approvals required for the buildings and the systems and the processes and procedures and personnel approvals that have to be sought for and approved, um, you know, the IRs really do go through a lot just to be able to open their doors and offer the entertainment that they do. And I think some of the approvals that are required by regulators are not value adding, and in fact they just add cost and time. So as we talk through this technology and as we talk about protocols and as we talk about standards and APIs, think about where there might be opportunities to improve the processes that already exist using technologies that might exist today in the gaming industry, but most likely are going to exist outside of the gaming industry, but have direct applicability inside of it. And think about where we could standardize certain things that will ultimately benefit both regulators and operators alike. So keep that in mind as we're going through this. Challenge some of the stuff. Think about what and ask, why is it done that way? Is there a better way of doing it? Philip, you were asking about symbol-based, progressives. That's the way they've always been done. Is that the right way to do them? Is there a different way? Is there different technology that we can use? A lot of these concepts, a lot of this technology was developed a long time ago, and quite frankly, it has not changed all that much. So there is opportunity, and I think as we start to talk about online, you'll start to see how online works, drastically different, yet somewhat similarly to land based, and where the opportunities to innovate in online are more significant. So